Here there was a point of land washed by the Ohio on the north, and the Great Kanawha on the west, to which the appropriate name of Point Pleasant had been given. It does not appear that civilization had as yet penetrated this region. The immigration to Kentucky had floated by it down the river, descending from Pittsburgh, or had crossed the mountain passes from North Carolina several hundred miles to the south. Colonel Boone was now 55 years of age. If there were any settlement at the time at Point Pleasant, it must have consisted merely of a few log huts. Here, at all events, Colonel Boone found the solitude and the communion with nature alone, for which his heart yearned. The world might call him poor, and still he was rich in the abundant supply of all his earthly wants. He reared his log hut where no one appeared to dispute his claim. The fertile soil around, a virgin soil, rich with undeveloped treasures, under the simplest culture produced abundantly, and the forest around supplied him daily with animal food more than a European peasant sees in a year. Here Colonel Boone and his family remained for several years, to use a popular phrase, buried from the world. His life was mainly that of a hunter. Mr. Peck, speaking of the habits of those pioneers who depended mainly upon the rifle for support, writes: "I have often seen him get up early in the morning, walk hastily out, and look anxiously to the woods and snuff the autumnal winds with the highest rapture, then return into the house and cast a quick and attentive look at the rifle, which was always suspended to a joist by a couple of buckhorns or little forks. The hunting dog, understanding the intentions of his master, would wag his tail, and by every blandishment in his power express his readiness to accompany him to the woods." It probably did not diminish Colonel Boone's interest in his new home that it was exposed to all the perils of border life; that his rifle should ever be loaded; that his faithful watch dog should be stationed at the door to give warning of any approaching footsteps; and that he and his family should always be ready for a siege or battle. With these precautions, Boone had no more fear of assault from half a dozen vagabond Indians than he had from so many howling wolves. The casualties of life had greatly reduced his family. Of his 3 sons, the eldest had fallen beneath the arrow and the tomahawk of the savages amidst the gloomy defiles of the Alleghany Mountains. His second son was killed at the dreadful battle of the Blue Licks, as his agonized father had been compelled to abandon him to the merciless foe. His third son, probably chagrined by the treatment which his father had received from the authorities of Kentucky, had bidden adieu to all the haunts of civilized life, and, traversing the wilderness towards the setting sun for many hundred miles, had crossed the Mississippi and sought a home in the wilds of upper Louisiana, then under the dominion of Spain. As Boone was quietly engaged in his solitary vocation of farmer and hunter, where there were no books, no newspapers, nothing whatever to inform him of what was transpiring in the busy world of civilization or in the haunts of savage life, 2 or 3 hunters came one day to his cabin, where of course they met with a very hospitable reception. It was not difficult to entertain guests in those days. The floor of the cabin supplied all the needed accommodations for lodging. Each guest with his rifle could easily furnish more food than was desired for the whole family. A little corn meal, very coarsely ground in what was called a tub mill, gave quite a variety of palatable food. Boiled in water, it formed a dish called mush, which, when eaten with milk, honey, or butter, presented truly a delicious repast for hungry mouths. Mixed with cold water, it was ready to be baked. When covered with hot ashes, it emerged smoking from the glowing embers in the form of ash cake. When baked upon a shingle and placed before the coals, it was termed journey cake, so called because it could be so speedily prepared. This name has been corrupted in modern times into Johnny cake. When baked upon a heveless hoe, it formed the hoe cake. When baked in a kettle covered with a heated lid, if in one large cake, it was called a pone or loaf. If in quite a number of small cakes, they were called dodgers. Corn flour seems to have been peculiarly prepared by Providence for the pioneers. For them it possesses some very great advantages over all the other flour. It requires but few and the most simple cooking utensils. It can be rendered very palatable without either yeast, eggs, sugar, or spices of any kind. It can easily be raised in the greatest abundance, and affords the most wholesome and nutritious foods. "Let pagans," writes Mr. Hartley, "be sung all over the mighty West to the Indian corn. Without it the West would still have been a wilderness. Was the frontier suddenly invaded, without commissary or quartermaster or other sources of supply, each soldier parched a peck of corn. A portion of it was put into his pockets, and the remainder in his wallet, and throwing it upon his saddle with his rifle on his shoulder, he was ready in half an hour for the campaign. Did a flood of immigration inundate the frontier with an amount of consumers disproportioned to the supply of grain, the facility of raising the Indian corn, and its early maturity, gave promise and guarantee that the scarcity would be temporary and tolerable. Did the safety of the frontier demand the services of every adult militiaman, the boys and women could themselves raise corn, and furnish ample supplies of bread. Did an autumnal intermittent confine the whole family or the entire population to the sick bed, this certain concomitant of the clearing and cultivating the new soil mercifully withholds its paroxysms till the crop of corn is made. It requires no further labor or care afterwards. Pagans, say we, and a temple of worshipping to the creator of Indian corn." The hunters to whom we referred were indeed congenial companions to Daniel Boone. As day after day they accompanied him in the chase, and night after night sat by the blaze of his cabin fire, related to him the adventures they had encountered far away beyond the Mississippi, the spirit of his youth revived within him. An irrepressible desire sprang up in his heart again to become a pioneer in the pathless forest which he loved so well. It is not improbable also that his parental feelings might have been aroused by the consideration that his son had gone before him to that distant land, and that he might have been animated by the hope of being reunited with him in his declining years. The hunters represented to him that another Kentucky could be found beyond the Father of Waters; that the game was abundant, and would be inexhaustible until long after his earthly pilgrimage should end; that the Spanish government, desirous of promoting emigration, were ready to make the most liberal grants of land to any man who would rear a cabin and commence the cultivation of the soil; that over an expanse of hundreds of miles of a sunny clime, and as luxurious soil as heart could desire, he could select his broad acres with no fear of ever again being ejected from his home. These representations were resistless. Colonel Boone decided again to become a wanderer to the far West, though it involved the relinquishment of American citizenship and becoming a subject of the crown of Spain. The year 1795 had now come. As Colonel Boone gathered up a few of his household goods for the fourth great remove of his life. He was born on the banks of the Delaware. His childhood was passed amidst the solitudes of the upper Schuylkill. His early manhood, where he reared his cabin and took to it his worthy bride, was in North Carolina. Thence, penetrating the wilderness through adventures surpassing the dreams of romance, he had passed many years amidst the most wonderful vicissitudes of quietude and of agitation, of peace and of war, on the settlement of which he was the father, at Boonesborough, in the valley of the Kentucky River. Robbed of the possessions which he had earned 100 times over, he had sought a temporary residence at Point Pleasant in Virginia. And now, as he was approaching the termination of his 80 years, he was prepared to traverse the whole extent of Kentucky, from the Alleghany border on the east, to the mighty flood of the Mississippi, which then upon the west rushed with its turbid flood through an almost unbroken solitude. It was a long, long journey. We can only surmise the reasons why he did not float down the Ohio in a flat boat. It may be said that he was entirely unaccustomed to boating; and as it does not appear that any other families joined him in the